Hello, everyone, and I'm your host of the Seeking Heaven channel, Tamara Caulder Richardson. Hope you're having a great day. And before we get started with our guests, I want to go over a couple announcements. If you haven't subscribed to the Seeking Heaven channel, I think it would be awesome if you did that, especially if you make comments. I do try to respond to everybody that I can and get a dialogue going. That's a lot of fun, and that way I get to know you a little bit. Also, consider being a member or donating to help support this channel. That's really terrific if you can feel that in your heart to do so. And as well as check out my academy, which is Academy of Divine Wisdom of Spiritual Ascension. And I have different classes like I'm teaching now, the superpower training for 3 months. It's still not too late if you want to do that and jump in there. We're not too far along. And I have other classes and so forth, as well as if you're interested in galactic star seed sessions, and you can check that out on Academy of Divine Wisdom under services, or my Seeking Heaven, my Southern Belle Medium channel, which I have on my website. If you check that out, you can purchase a life path or evidential medium reading. So that's my announcements, and I want to talk about my guest today. I'm super excited about having her here, and I feel like it's kind of a rare thing because she's so busy interviewing other people that we don't always get to hear from her. And so today we get to hear candidly her responses on these spiritual topics as well as her spiritual journey. And I'm talking about Louisa from Passion Harvest. And I have been on her channel speaking about my 6 near-death experiences, and we're going to be talking about my galactic on the Galactic Federation, all that at another time. But I've had an opportunity to get to know her, and she's a lovely person, and I can't wait for you to get to know her too. She is known as a global passion ambassador, which I love that. That is awesome. What a cool title. I mean, if you're going to have a title, pick one you like. So she's interviewed people on her YouTube channel, popular YouTube channel, Passion Harvest. Check it out. She has interviewed so many different types of people you can see with elegance and grace, really a first class channel. So do check that out. She's an intuitive, and she also has where you can connect with her. And I'll have all the links and everything below, where she helps with future memories and different dimensions of the soul. And she coaches her clients in the mystical mastery program. And this is a fast track for your spiritual growth and recognizing your divine path. So she can tell us more about that later. But let me bring her on so we can hear about her spiritual journey. So welcome, Louisa.
Thank you, Tamara. That was the best introduction I've ever had. Wow. You make me
Well,
sound so fabulous. I love it. Thank you so much for
you
being
are
here.
fabulous. You are fabulous. I've occasionally get to meet other YouTube hosts and so forth, and you just really have a first class channel. And it's because you're first class and you're very
Oh,
organized. I was very impressed when we went to the section on me, and you said, "Here you go. Here's this link," and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful." I was like, "You are so businesslike and organized. You must come from a corporate background because you have these organizational skills that a lot of people that don't have a corporate background don't have that." And many times I find, I don't know about you, that I end up interviewing myself and with people, and that's okay. But with you, you're very organized and spot on, and you have a real keen clarity. And so that's my observation from a host to host. You do a beautiful job even on your
oh,
website.
thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome, welcome. Well, we're finally here together, and I'm curious about the spiritual aspects of you. And I want I just want to have a conversation. I want you to jump in and talk about wherever you want to start, where you feel like you're the key points of your spiritual journey really kind of jogged you into awakening, and what you learned from that and where you are now. And then I want to kind of get into like why you started your channel, and why why that all happened, what you learned from certain guests, and that's got to be a story in itself because people don't realize it's a lot of work to have a YouTube channel and to coordinate people it's a fascinating experience. So I would love to hear about that as well as your take on some current spiritual topics. So just jump in and wherever you want to in your spiritual
Okay.
journey.
Gosh,
And
where do I start? Well, people, I mean, yes, I have had what you call dark nights of the soul and continue to have them, and spiritual awakenings. I think they're never ending. Um, I guess I can start when I was very young. I think first I just want to say I believe we're all intuitive. It is a sense like one of our like sight, hearing, smell, touch. It's just that we haven't learnt to accept and utilize it. We all have a deep inner knowing within us. We all know the answers of everything that's happened and will happen. I guess when I was 11 years old, I was very sick. And I won't go back too further than that. I had German measles and measles. And I remember all I wanted, I kept asking, I could not even open my eyes. I was so sick and I was in bed for days. And I remember I kept asking for spaghetti bolognese sandwiches for some bizarre reason. But of course, I couldn't eat. I could barely drink. And I remember my father carrying me into cold ice baths just to cool me down. And after about 7 days, they got a little bit worried. My family didn't believe in doctors. And I remember I started having these sensations, and it was almost like I felt like I was on a roller coaster and I had no idea what was happening. I didn't like it and I couldn't get off. I got very, very big and very, very small. And it just kept going. And I remember I was looking at myself, and at that age, we don't necessarily have the concept to grasp it, but I was looking at myself very, very small. And I thought, well, if I'm looking at myself, where am I? And then it kept continuing. Every time I opened my eyes, it stopped. And when I closed my eyes, it would just continue. And then all of a sudden, I didn't get small anymore. I just got bigger and bigger. One could perhaps call it an out of body experience. It wasn't a near death experience. I was incredibly sick. But I remember what was so interesting from that point, because I had the concept even at 11 or 12. Well, my body is there and I'm sick and I'm still identified with that, but I can hear conversations that are in the kitchen, and I knew they were talking about me and worried. And then I could go down into the garden and be in the garden. So it wasn't that I even had to travel. I was just part of everything. And since from that time, things started happening. I became even more intuitive, and I felt spirits or ghosts in the house. And my parents said, "Don't be silly. Don't, you're just making it up." And life went on, and with my peers and friends, I came to realize that wasn't probably acceptable. And then I married and was in a particularly unhappy marriage, and I'm a slow learner that lasted 19 years. And I think I blocked it off for so long. And I think what I said before is we're all intuitive. We know the answer. But sometimes, well, I guess I would say we don't want to break the dream. We don't want to break the bubble of what we think is right, what other people perceive is the best way to live. But when we know in our hearts what's true and right. And I could then just say how I started on Passion Harvest if you wanted me to.
Really? So, okay. So, can I jump in and ask you a couple
Yes,
questions?
I love
Okay.
questions.
Okay. So, this is good to know. So, at a very early age, at 11, it was interesting. You remember that ice bath like I did.
Mm,
It was horrible when you have a fever and you're burning up and you're freezing. You don't want to be on ice. It's funny you remember the same thing.
yeah.
But it does work. That's why people do it. That you saw that you were not you. Okay, if I'm looking at me, then who is me? And you realize very early on that I'm not my body. And it sounds like that you also had to deal with, you opened that layer of an spiritual onion on you that you could now see into other realms and see the ghost on the property. Was it an old house?
It was in Australia, so nothing's really that old in Australia, but
Mhm.
maybe 60 years old. It wasn't necessarily that old,
Mm.
but somehow it opened up some sort of portal for
Mm.
me.
Well, and it could be, a lot of times if we're open, we're beacons, and you could just be, out and about, going and getting, a coffee or running an errand, and you'll feel them around because they're somewhere in the neighborhood. And they see, oh, oh, bright light, and they see that. So that made you attracted, they were attracted to you. So you saw that. Yeah, I also learned, probably not popular, oops, excuse me, probably not popular to talk about these things. And so you were smart with that. So you really put a can on it till when? Because you said you got married. How long did you can your intuitive abilities and not really talk about it?
When I realized I couldn't continue to live the way I was living, and when I realized I wanted a life far greater than the life that I had been living,
Got it. So you
and I
didn't.
strove to overcome fear.
That's beautiful. So it seems like that would be really tough, though. I mean, I don't want to lightly go over that, and I don't want to, put you on the spot. I would never want to do that to anyone. But being married 19 years, I mean, it's more than the emotional bond. Even if you're not in love with someone, you still care for them. There's still some emotion tied in there. But the fact that you had to separate yourself out for what your higher self, what you needed, took a lot of courage. And then also possible unsupportive people or ridicule. And to me, that says a lot about your character. I mean, that would have had to have been really tough, because you're choosing basically you and the unknown versus the unhappiness that you were in. And it takes a lot of guts and courage for you to do that. So I commend you
Thank you.
on that. So when that happened, did you feel also that because your unhappiness, you probably were not living your highest, truest self when you left? You said that is that when you started your channel? Is that when you embraced your already there intuitive abilities?
Well, two things coincided with that. I used to be afraid of so many things, but I think it's almost like a mental switch. I used to be, when I was younger, I was so shy I could hardly talk to people. And I remember being at a party one day and I wanted to have conversations with the other children, but I couldn't talk. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm just not going to be shy anymore. I'm going to change. I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be like that. But I was afraid of so many things. So the two elements, I was living what seemed like a perfect life. I had a lovely, as you mentioned, a corporate career and two beautiful children that were almost adults, um, house, everything that from the outside that looked perfect. And again, as I said, I dragged my body to work every day and I just wasn't happy. I haven't listened to her for a long time, but Abraham Hicks, I love her.
Yeah.
Um, and I realized, which she talked about a lot, is if we create our reality, then I thought, well, if I created this, then I can recreate something else. And I also took the advice of try to be happy all the time. Try to look for everything that's positive, because like so many of us with cyclic patterns, if we unhappy in a job, then we leave and find the next job, and then we still have unhappiness, or whether it's relationships or so many different novels or stories of our life. And I started meditating, and each day I would go out for lunch and sit in the park across the road and kick off my high heels. And again, I was still so afraid. I would close my eyes and look up at the sun in case any of my coworkers saw me and thought I was weird and meditating, because I was just really worried what people thought at the time. And I remember just before the end of this situation, I looked down and there was a gum leaf that had fallen from the tree, and I picked it up because it reminded me of my happiest time of the day, being in nature, being in sunshine, being in silence and not being in the office. And I took it back and hid it behind my monitor of my computer. Again, didn't want anyone to think I was weird or crazy. And I just left it there and would occasionally look at it. And I always say, if we're not in flow, in alignment, if we're not listening to our higher self and intuition, many times the universe has a funny way of pushing us, kicking and screaming. I was eventually retrenched from the role. Again, terrified. And I remember packing up my office, and all I really had was a USB, a monitor from the monitor. And I looked behind the monitor and I saw that gum leaf, and it was dead and shriveled after several months. And I just received the message, if I had stayed, and I could very well have, I would have ended up like that dead, shriveled gum leaf.
So, so you left the corporate after being how many years in the corporate world? You decided to
Many years.
really, a lot of people are doing that. Do you think that 20? I mean, I want to hear where that transition, all this took place, because a lot of us has been a lot. Well, of course, like you said, we're always in flux, but a lot of us had changes in 2020, and I wanted to see how that affected you too. So, I'm trying to get a timeline. So, the marriage. And also, don't you think it's how you end a relationship too? It's not just ending it; it's how
Absolutely.
it's with.
I realized that I went into the Akashic Records, but I realized I realized, because many people, women I'd spoken to, were unhappy and still spoke about their husband all the time in negative terms, and I didn't want to be like that. I realized that my former husband was my greatest teacher, because he taught me, perhaps not in the nicest way,
Mhm.
to respect myself and stand up for myself and honor myself and be the person who I really wanted to be. And without that teaching, which I believe is one of my sole purposes in this life, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Well, I think that the shift in how you looked at that, I think it's key, because I've also seen that carrying the hatred, the only person
Mm,
that truly hurts is our own heart. But the fact that you shifted that, and it's found, I think that even that's works with not just with any relationship, not a marriage, but just that,
yeah,
but anything you can shift and go and find one thing that you admire about that person, even if they're really like a horrible person. You can find one or two things, like they're a good dresser. They're very charming with people when they're.
well, it's not really about the other person. Everything that happens in our external landscape is coming from our internal landscape. Everything that happens is a lesson, and you can say, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? Blaming others or becoming a victim
Mm.
never serves anyone.
No, it doesn't. I saw that with my own mom and going through the divorce, and and I thought, gee, there's got to be a better way to do this, because we did, everyone picks their situation. They do. I mean, ouch, but they
Yes.
do, and so that says a lot about you being able to work through that, because you have to have your head in the right space to infuse love in it somehow. It sounds like that you definitely that you did that. I'm not saying it wasn't easy. So when you
Mhm.
left the marriage, when did the spiritual awakening? I want to hear all about that. How did you get on your own? How did you start
Spiritual.
speaking out?
Oh my gosh. Well, so I still remember walking out of the office that day when I was packed up my USB and took my handbag, and terrified. My hand was shaking, and I thought, I know from this point on, I made a promise to the universe. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I always wanted an Excel spreadsheet of the rest of my life. I always wanted to know exactly what. It's not going to happen. But I made a promise from that day forward, I would only do what I was passionate about. I became fascinated with spirituality, and I wanted to read all these books, and it's like it just came flooding in after years of it being repressed. And I thought, well, I don't have time to read all the books, and I want to help other people and myself. So what I'll do is, I had a great idea. I thought, you know what? I'll just interview incredible people like yourself across the globe. Then I don't have to read the books, and then I get to share it with everyone. So that's how Passion Harvest started. It was a bit of a process from that. But I guess the final insight in overcoming fear and leaving my marriage, and I'll tell you later about fear. I thought I was done with fear, but clearly not. But fear really doesn't move me at all anymore. Very little. I was terrified of being poor, of being a single mother, of so many things. And I thought, well, why am I thinking that the future is going to be worse? And I have to tell you now, my life is more amazing than I could have imagined. But I had this dream every night for 6 months, reoccurring dream, not necessarily wanted. It was very, very clear that it started. There was a woman on a cliff in a cage, surrounded by the most magnificent virgin forest. And I never saw, she always had her back to me. And I tried to call out to her to say, how can I help you? Because I heard her screaming, and sometimes she was crying and whimpering. And this would happen night after night. It was so real. Some days I saw her banging on the bars and her knuckles were bleeding, and it hadn't rained for days and she was drinking the blood. Other days I saw her eating insects. Interesting, yes, it was in the daytime, even though I was dreaming this. Sometimes I saw her at night and the stars, and I even remember the metal cage she was in. It wasn't big enough for her to stand up, or wasn't long enough for her to lie down. So she'd lie at the top of the cage and stick her legs out the bars. It was heartbreaking, and she never heard me. So this went on for 6 months, and I just thought, definitely don't want to keep having these dreams. What can I do? And I saw on the last few nights, this woman had like a thick, heavy metal chain around her neck. And on the last night, I never had the dream again. I called out to her and I said, I have to help you. You can't leave. I didn't know what she was, perhaps a lost soul, or I just didn't know that she was in physical form. She was naked and dirty. She had been there for years. And finally she heard me, and the woman turned around and it was me.
My gosh. I mean, that's, was it that must have been shocking because and sad.
It like I looked at her and she looked at me, and the chain that she had around her neck was the key to the cage. She could have always got out, but she was too afraid. And we had this telepathic communication. I can't remember how it went, but she said, really? Is there people that make keys to a cage to open the heart or open the doors of the soul? And I said, I'll help you out. And she said, I'm too afraid. I'm weak. I don't even know if I can stand upright. And I said, just unlock the cage. I'll do it with you. And this went on for a while, and I helped her out, and we jumped off the cliff. And that was the last time I ever had the dream, and my fear dissolved.
Now, was that after, or did that kinda
Before
spur
the
you leaving the husband?
Yes, it was a unfortunately, I want everything to happen straight away. It is a process.
Yeah,
So we have energy. I mean, you know all of this, but sometimes manifestations, things we create, it takes a while to catch up in physical reality.
right. Well, that's when I mentioned on your show what Jesus told me when I was over there. He said that, in heaven, he said,
Mhm.
"We can think something and it manifests very quickly, like a mountain or a little river or whatever, but here, if we think something, we have to continue to manifest it by keeping those thoughts pure, keeping it pure instead of putting a no on it," which is a lot like what is it, Esther Hicks and all
Yes,
that.
yes.
That's what they, talk about, but so, that's pretty powerful. That to me sounds
It was a
like
life changer.
that sounds like a movie or a book. I mean, that it does. I mean, it's because that's I think that the sad part is that you didn't realize that it was you, because I think that, what is it, the old saying that you can feed someone parts of an elephant and then they don't realize they're eating this whole big thing. I think that so many people don't realize that they are caged because they're used to it, and they go along with the status quo because everybody, maybe you have friends in place, maybe you have relatives in place, and the children or whatever, you have an infrastructure in place, and so they don't realize that they are in that cage. And
And
people grow apart,
we usually have the keys around our neck. It's just belief and overcoming fear. I always say, obviously thoughts create our reality to some extent. There are soul paths and purposes and lessons we need to learn in this life. But really, our birthright is freedom, to learn freedom, to overcome freedom. And all that we have, despite what happens outside of us, are our thoughts. No one else can choose our thoughts.
No, you're right. I mean, you're speaking my language. I mean, I believe that freedom is important, and freedom of expression, freedom to live, freedom to create, freedom to pursue the things that we want to, and it's just that simple. And even if your passion, your desire was to be able to just go outside and plant a garden, and you didn't have some big, corporate job or a big trophy or whatever. I have trophies in the attic from what I won in my advertising agency, and I'm
Oh,
thinking, what am I going to do with all that? That was a time and place, and that's fine, and that's good, and that's great. But we change and we evolve. So now that you let your higher self, your very sad higher self, out of the cage, and you started, that's a great, I mean, it's actually a great idea. Let me start interviewing people, which gave you your voice back. And really, before I can say, before I was public speaking and all that, I'm sure you probably were too, and but this is different. Just being live, things can happen, and it does help strengthen your inner voice and your throat chakra, being able to just talk to different people. So when did you start your channel?
3 years ago.
Three?
Um, 3 years ago, yes. I still remember it
You're
started just,
kidding. Me
yeah.
too.
Oh, it
Okay.
started just with audio. I remember so nervous to press upload on the button, and I thought, oh my God, I'm so nervous. And I went to have a cup of tea, and then I came back and I thought, just do it. I was so worried what my family and friends would think, that I'm so weird and I'm speaking to all these bizarre people. But it's funny how we can look
Same
back and
thing.
not worry.
Isn't that funny? Because when I started mine 3 years ago, it was about three and a half. Um, I did YouTube was not on my brain. It was not even on that. But after the whole 2020, and I felt this incredible passion and love for humanity, for people all over the world. And so it was actually it was Jesus that came to me that said in March it hit curious messages. In July said YouTube, and I kind of argued like, YouTube, what's that all about? But what I'm like you, what happened was it's gone into a different direction. I've met the most interesting people, topics I talk about now with people. I don't I don't think I would have talked about that unless I had
No.
unless I had, I mean, I'm talking about, secret space programs and us living on the moon. I mean, like, I wouldn't have just, like, who in this world in your neighborhood are you going to talk to about these things, or near death experiences and you being in different states while looking at your body? I mean, so I'm with you. That I didn't realize it, but it's really fed my soul.
Me too. Me
Um,
too.
and
Yes.
but people want to hear from you too, because what's happened, and I didn't plan it, and you probably didn't either, is that I've always been very curious about different topics. It was fascinating me, and I have read a lot, but it's not like meeting the people. It really isn't. If you meet the people, you get it firsthand. I mean, do you agree? I mean, reading a book is a lot different than actually talking to someone.
I absolutely I absolutely agree. Someone asked me the other day, I did an interview, who do I listen to now, or who do I read? I don't, and it was interesting because I said I don't really follow it. I mean, occasionally I look at people. I don't really read books anymore. I think now that I'm living in the south of France and I have a beautiful home and I, for the most part, live by myself, I listen to me, because
That's the correct
I just
answer there.
find there's so many more answers. Of course, inspiration and education are wonderful, but we we are units of consciousness. Our consciousness creates our reality, and each day, not always pleasant, I learn so many lessons about myself, about how to really stop and get in touch with myself and get to know myself as a person, or as a spiritual being having a physical experience, and who am I and why am I here, and what's it all about? And it's continually evolving and changing. Nothing remains stagnant. But it's more important, I think, than anything is to really discover a relationship with yourself.
Well, yes. Who was it? I was on some kind of show speaking. It was a conference, and one of the speakers, I can't remember who, because I like to give people credit, but I can't remember who said this at this time. But we made a joke about I was co-hosting on Portal to Ascension, but there was a joke someone mentioned about in order to really gain their life, they had to divorce the person they were with and marry themselves. And I thought how
Yes, I
true.
love that. I love
I
that.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that. That's why I passed that along. And not that you have to divorce the other person. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the fact is that there comes to a place where you have to realize that it starts with us and it ends with us. So I think that all the it doesn't feel like effort if you really are interested in something, but honestly, this spiritual journey does require effort. All that you take with you, so there's no
And
loss.
yes, look, life, no doubt, in all of our humanness at some point is going to be brutal. We'll experience loss, suffering, so many things. But it's ever evolving. We're constantly shifting in and out of consciousness, and we're constantly shedding our skin and becoming a newer version of ourselves. I'm certainly not the person I was yesterday. And yes, major events change that, but we're constantly evolving and shifting. So often we can get stuck in habitual patterns and we don't even know why we're doing them. Or I say to some of my clients, you're living in a graveyard of the past. You can't be the future version of yourself you wish to be if you're still walking in the past. You can't get from there to there. It doesn't work.
Yes, you're right. Well, I want to hear more about change and all the changes that you've been through, and also you're having your different guests on different topics, how that's changed your own consciousness, because I know it's changed mine. I didn't expect that. And I want to see kind of where you are now and what you're owning as your truth. So everybody stay tuned for part 2. And Louisa, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you. And your websites will be below too.
Okay, so it's passionharvest.com on the website, or have a look at Passion Harvest on YouTube. That's where you can find me and contact me. And I love to hear from people, and I always try to respond as quickly as I can.
Well, you have been such a delight. Everybody stay tuned for part 2 because we're going to deep dive with this. So thank you so much. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Please subscribe, like, and make comments, and support this channel by becoming a member. Thank you for your continued support.